You may have seen it, but there's a movie coming out later this month called Eternity. And it's advertised, the premise, I haven't seen it yet, obviously it's not like that, but it's advertised, the premise is interesting and melodramatic. After death, souls have 1 week to decide where they will spend eternity. For the main character, a woman named Joan, well, she finds herself having to choose between her late husband, the man she built a life with, raised children with, and grew old alongside, and her first love, who died young, leaving all that promise unfulfilled. It's a romantic drama, a meditation on love and choice, of what we carry with us beyond this life. And at its heart, it is a question that human beings have been asking for as long as we've been burying our dead. What happens to our relationships when we die? Who belongs with whom in eternity? So we have this contemporary question being asked by a big-time movie, but it's also an ancient question. In fact, it's the very question that drives our gospel reading this morning that we just heard. The scripture reading this morning presents us with what appears on the surface to be a rather absurd scene. The Sadducees come to Jesus with a hypothetical question. And it's important that we understand who the Sadducees were. Unlike the Pharisees who believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees did not. They were the religious aristocracy of the time, the temple elite, folks with great power and authority, and they held that when you died, that was it. No afterlife, no resurrection, nothing to put, right? And so they come to Jesus with what they think is a brilliant trap. But it's really just a reductio ad absurdum argument designed to make the whole concept of resurrection look foolish. They tell him this story. There's a woman who marries a man and he dies. And according to the levirate marriage, which required a brother to marry his deceased brother's widow to preserve the family line, she marries the second brother, and he dies. So she marries the third brother, and he dies. And on to all 7 brothers, each one dying in turn, until finally the woman herself dies. And then the Sadducees spring their trap. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? She was married to all 7. It's not so different from the premise of that film, Eternity, is it? Who belongs with whom when this life is over? Except that the movie treats it as a genuine romantic dilemma, something poignant and heartfelt, whereas the Sadducees in this story are treating it as a joke, a logical trap designed to make the resurrection look absurd. Can you hear that smirk in their voices? Can you sense how pleased they are with themselves? They think they constructed the perfect puzzle, one that will force Jesus either to say something absurd about heavenly polygamy, or to admit that the resurrection doesn't make that much sense. It's a gotcha question. It's not asked in good faith. They don't actually want to understand the resurrection. They want to discredit it. They want to embarrass Jesus in front of the crowds, all of his followers, so they can look like a fool, so they can reclaim their power from his movement. But Jesus refuses to play into their game. He doesn't engage with them with the terms of their hypothetical. He never really actually addresses the question. He doesn't try to answer which brother gets the woman in heaven. He doesn't get drawn into their sinful trap. Instead, he does something far more profound. He shifts the entire conversation. He moves them from their little legalistic puzzle to the vast reality of who God is and what God does. Those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. And marriage is a good thing, right? But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age, and in the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. In other words, Sadducees, you're asking the wrong question. You're trying to imagine resurrection as if it's just this life continuing on with the same rules, the same structures, the same arrangements. The resurrection is not about the perpetuation of earthly systems. It's not about just continuing marriages or property arrangements or social hierarchies. Those things serve us here and now in this mortal life, but they are not ultimate. They are not eternal, despite what some movie titled Eternity might suggest. Resurrection is about something so fundamentally different, so utterly transformed that our current categories break down. We cannot comprehend it fully because we are trying to imagine it with minds shaped by mortality, by loss, by death. We're like people who have only ever known winter, trying to imagine the springtime. We simply don't have a frame of reference. We don't have the language. We don't have the experience that would allow us to grasp what it is exactly that Jesus is talking about when he speaks of resurrection life. And Jesus, in the culmination of the story, says to the Sadducees, God is not God of the dead, but God of the living. For to him all of them are alive. And this is the heart of the matter. This is what redeems death. Not that we can explain exactly how resurrection works or what it looks like. Not that we have all the answers about the mechanics of eternity, but that the God who enters into relationship with us is a God who does not let us go. The relationship endures, the covenant holds. Death cannot sever what God has bound together. This is the redemption of death. Not that death disappears, becomes easy, or stops hurting. Death is real. Loss is grief real. Grief is real. But death is no longer the final word. That is what we preach and proclaim as Christians, that death has lost its sting. It is no longer pure negation, pure ending, pure darkness, because the God we worship, the God who raised Jesus from the dead, this God has taken death itself and transformed it. Death has been made into a passage rather than a wall, a crossing rather than a hard stop, a hard ending. It remains painful, for sure. But it cannot separate us from the love of God. It cannot sever the covenant. It cannot end the relationship that God has established with us. Here's where I would suggest to you that the gospel becomes urgent, where it calls us to action here and now. If death has been redeemed, if death is no longer the end, but a new beginning, if God is God of the living and not of the dead, then what does that mean for how we live right now? What does it mean for how we spend our days, our energy, our resources, our very lives? Well, it means we don't sit around mapping the afterlife. We don't spend our time constructing elaborate theories about heaven or debating the mechanics of the resurrection. We don't need the movie. We don't need the drama. There is work to do. We don't waste our days imagining what comes next, while ignoring what is right in front of us. Because God is a God of the living, and the living right here, right now, are where God is at work. And we are called as disciples to join in that work. Not in some far-off day or far-off place, but right here, right now. And this has always been the Methodist way. From the very beginning, from John Wesley preaching in the fields and organizing societies for mutual care, our tradition has understood that personal salvation and social holiness are inseparable. Wesley didn't just preach salvation. He organized schools, medical clinics, and orphanages. We do not simply wait for death to arrive so we can experience this resurrection. We do not sit passively by while people suffer, comforting ourselves with thoughts of heaven. Instead, we roll up our sleeves and we get to work, making life more beautiful, more just, more whole for more people. We feed the hungry. We clothe the naked. We visit the prisoner. We advocate for the vulnerable. We work for justice and peace. Because the God of the living is at work in this world, redeeming not just death, but life itself. And we, who dare to proclaim ourselves followers of Jesus of Nazareth, we are called to participate in that same redemption. In just a few moments, we're going to hear from a representative of the local food pantry that this congregation supports. And I want you to listen carefully, because what you're going to hear is resurrection work. You're going to hear about people who are making sure that their neighbors, people who have only known the winter of food insecurity, are given a taste of spring. People who understand that the God of the living calls us to sustain and celebrate life, not in some distant hereafter, but right here, right now, in this community, on this street, in this moment. The Sadducees came to Jesus with hypothetical questions about a hypothetical woman and 7 hypothetical brothers, trying to trap him with a hypothetical theological puzzle. But Jesus turned it all upside down and redirected them to focus on reality right in front of them. To the God who is actively engaged with the living, the God who does not let go. And that same Jesus redirects us today. He calls us away from our speculations about what comes after death and toward the urgent work of making life more whole for those who are living right now. He calls us to feed the hungry, not because it will earn us a place in heaven, but because the God of the living is already at work in these acts of compassion and charity, which already are at work transforming death. The death of slow hunger, the death of poverty, the death of isolation, transforming it into new life. This is what it means to be a resurrection people. We trust that death has been redeemed, and because we trust that, we are free to focus our energy on the here and now, on redeeming life here and now, because what will come, the resurrection, will take care of itself. That is someone else's responsibility. So instead, we are free to celebrate life in all of its fullness, and we're free to work for a world where more people have access to all that is needed for their fulfillment. Access to food, to shelter, to dignity, to community, and to love. We don't need all the answers about eternity. We simply need to show up, to do the work, to participate in God's ongoing, transforming works of grace, bringing life out of death, hope out of despair, and a new, renewing, revitalized spring out of winter. So let us give thanks to God, the God who is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living, the one who calls us to join in these great works, making all things new. May it be so.